Today's guest is someone who has worn so many hats in the entertainment industry. Nina Rabe-Cairns previously worked in media in northern Germany. She's also worked for MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, and worked as a senior editor and playlist curator for Spotify in Berlin. And after moving to Sydney in 2019, she worked in strategy and operations for Spotify's local office. These days, though, Nina sits in the big chair at global music distributor Ingrooves locally. Not only did she take on the role right at the start of the global pandemic, but as managing director, she now oversees business operations in Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Southeast Asia. It's not surprising then that she recently has just been included in the Billboard International Power Playlist for 2021. It's actually quite exciting for us to have a guest with such vast experience across the different parts of the industry, and it's equally as exciting to be chatting to someone who is invested in independent music while still being tied to the major label machine thanks to Universal Music Group's acquisition of Ingrooves in 2019. Nina, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get straight into it. How did you end up being the curator at Spotify in Germany, to taking the role here in Sydney, to then becoming MD at Ingrooves for Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Southeast Asia?
That's a big question.
Life story, go.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I'm good at embracing opportunities. Spotify was a little bit of an accident. I don't know. It sounds a bit weird because especially once I joined, I realized what I'd done. But I was at MTV and then Nickelodeon, and then at some point it didn't feel right, so I took a little break. And whilst I was on that break, a former colleague of mine from Viacom said, "Hey, there's someone on mat leave. This is exactly your vibe. Why don't you fill this position?" And I said, you sure? I don't know. I was the head of content already, so it felt like a step back, but I didn't have a plan B. So I thought, okay, well, let's do it. And it sounds so weird because then usually Spotify does this intro days where everyone goes to Stockholm, and then there's this huge presentation. Everyone's there. Daniel's there, and Katharina Berg, the HR head, said that they get 100,000 applications each month.
Wow.
So I felt like, okay, that was a little bit lucky.
Wow. 100,000 applications each month.
And that was 2017, so no idea what it looks like these days. Probably more.
Yeah, wow. Okay, but then the jump from Spotify to MD at Ingrooves.
Mm-hmm. So I was at Spotify and I was very happy. It's an amazing job. I absolutely loved it. But I've also spent 10 years in Berlin, and at some point I thought, okay, what's next? And especially as an editor, it's very niche. It's a very niche job. All you do is listen to music all day, every day, and that sounds lovely. But I'm also a very strategic person. I love looking at the bigger picture, etc. And I didn't think that I had the opportunities there that I wanted to pursue. So, and then also being in Berlin for 10 years, thought, okay, what's next? And then my partner's Australian, so we thought, okay, let's give Australia a go. Again, not really with a plan. Yeah, and then we just packed our bags and moved. And
let's go. Oh, sorry, you go, Luke.
So yeah, you came to Australia. You still worked for Spotify for a little bit, and then when you moved to Ingrooves, was it an advertised position? Did
Nope.
you get how did it happen?
No. So lucky for me, editor jobs are really hard to fill because it's a very specialized job. And so when I moved to Australia, they still hadn't found someone new. So I took this job and just moved to the
This is at
Sydney
Spotify?
Yes. To the Sydney office.
Yeah.
And just was on a contract. And my playlists were pretty global, so it wasn't really important for me to be in Berlin. Yeah, and then I did that for a while, for a couple of months, which was amazing because I also got the chance to get to know the industry. When you're with Spotify, that opens a lot of doors. It's just how it is. And then I think 1 or 2 weeks before my contract was supposed to end, someone in the Australian team resigned, the manager for market strategy and operations, so really different role. But I said, look, I know the company really well. I know the business analytics part of it. So if you want me to, I can stay, because I still haven't figured out what I wanted to do as a next step. Gesundheit.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I did that. I didn't really know if I wanted to do that full time as the next step, but it was, again, really good for me to get to know the Australian market a little better. So I worked with the leads in the Spotify team on the strategy for the next year, the planning, the budgeting and all that. So that really helped. And by the time I did that, I had started talking to the people at Ingrooves. So one of our label partners here in Australia, who I knew before, just mentioned that I moved to Australia, and he said, hey, you should talk to Nina. She's in market now. And then, I had a couple of conversations, and especially with Bob Roback, our CEO, and I really liked the whole vision that he had for the company, and we got along really well. And then at some point we decided, let's give it a try. So became country manager for Australia and New Zealand.
What is that vision for the company?
What is that vision for the company? Well, the vision is that you should, as a distributor, empower independent artists and labels in a way that they can take as much ownership over their creative process, but also their business and their growth as a business as possible. And we do that by, of course, having a great team in place and experts in their fields to guide them, but also technology that gives them the right tools to do it themselves. Because I think that's something that's still lacking a little bit in that indie space. A lot of people don't really know how to monetize on their opportunities and how they really take ownership on how to read data and what to do as a next step and really build on that.
That's interesting about that vision as well, because that seems like a vision that will exist no matter who's in that top role as CEO. And we know that Bob stepped down recently as CEO, and you have mentioned that you're part of the leadership team that will then step in to help make decisions before a new person has come into the role. What does that look like now? And do you think that the vision has the capacity to change with a new head of the company?
Yes, unfortunately, Bob decided to leave. I'm very sad about it because he's been a great mentor and a great boss. However, as any good CEO, he's not so involved in the operational part of the business. That's led by me, by our CFO, Jeff, and other leaders in the company. So we'll be fine without him, even though I'll miss him, and the strategy is already in place. So what it will look like now, so I'll finally go to my onboarding in LA 2 years in.
Oh my gosh, because you haven't met anyone.
No.
Yeah.
No. We're close friends, but who knows? Let's see. So we'll get together as a leadership team and discuss what the next steps will be. So it's not about reinventing the wheel because it's working already, but really putting in place an implementation plan to say, okay, this is what we need to do to keep the ship steady until someone new steps in, and then we have something to hand over to, that is already in good shape. And Bob isn't gone. He'll stay for a couple of months, so it's not this surprise, bye. So he'll help us on that way.
And do you have an idea of when you might have a new CEO? There's no one in the running at the moment?
Well, it's not me.
Interesting. Oh,
I
well,
don't
I
know.
mean, look at your past. You could easily take it on. Why not the rest of the world? Look at all the countries you're currently looking after.
You never know. No, I don't know. There is no real timeline. And as far as I know, there is no candidate already on the horizon.
Yeah.
But who knows?
I want to talk to you about what that experience of moving into this role within a company based in Australia, within a country that is so different to what you are used to. You know, our Australian music industry, in my opinion, can be a little bit cliquey. And I want to know what that experience was like moving in. Were you embraced? Was it a bit cliquey in your experience?
Well, I mean, it was a very interesting experience because the first month of my, the start date of my Ingrooves journey was during the first lockdown. So before I thought, okay, well, I have gaps. I definitely have gaps. I don't know a lot of people. I know some, but not a lot. So I'll just go to every networking opportunity and I'll just put myself out there. And then lockdown happened and I thought, okay, you're a fraud. They'll figure out that you can't do this. So that was a little bit of a shocker at
Bit
first.
of imposter syndrome
Yeah,
happened?
a little bit, definitely. And
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the imposter
yeah,
syndrome club.
and I think I'm lucky in that way that everyone felt the same. Everyone was in shock. Everyone thought, oh, I'm very progressive to say, well, this will be at least for 2 months now. And look at us now. It's still not amazing. So at some point, people just realized, okay, this Zoom reality is here to stay, and then it was a little bit easier. But it was tough to the first couple of weeks to realize, okay, this is not how I planned it to be, and the gaps that I definitely have I won't be able to fill them in the way that I planned it. So yeah, but then again, I was pretty busy looking at our business and understanding the global setup of the business because it's a very complex one and not so easy to wrap your head around with all the technology bits, etc. So I spent a lot of time talking to everyone and then looking at the Australian market, which I knew a little bit, but also not to a degree where I could confidently already say, okay, let's make all these changes. So I did a thorough market analysis and just looked at where our business is currently positioned and what we should focus on, etc. So, yeah.
That's really interesting as well, because I was going to ask you, how does Ingrooves differentiate its offering to its local competitors, companies like Believe, companies like Orchard?
Yeah. Well, I think Ingrooves is a partner for top-tier labels, first and foremost, just because of the setup and what we offer. And in a very crowded distributor market, you have to differentiate yourself and you have to, instead of trying to be everything to everyone, you have to really focus on the parts that you're really good at and look for the perfect partners, because oftentimes I have the feeling that especially in the label and artist and manager field, they look at a distributor from this, oh yeah, well, I give you my content, you deliver it, job done, and you maybe pitch it to the DSPs, and we are beyond that. So for me, it's also from a business development perspective, it's really important for me to find the right partner. So I don't go into partnerships just for the sake of partnerships, but really finding the people who have similar values, who are looking for the same things, who are excited about the technology part. Technology part as well. So, yeah.
Can you articulate exactly the I guess whether it's technology, whether it's, you said you guys do more than just delivered services. Like, what is that more? Like,
Yeah.
why would, as a label or a manager or an artist, come to Ingrooves as opposed to Orchard or Believe or any of those other sort of competitors out there? What is the USP that that Ingrooves have? Sorry.
Well, for the last 5 years, we invested heavily in AI and machine learning. So we have a team of scientists sitting in Canada working on patterns and developing marketing tools that help artists and labels reach a high value fan base rather than just, you can book an ad online and you can use all the tools that are out there. But with the technology that we build, instead of just targeting a certain market and an age bracket, you can find fans that are very likely to really enjoy the music that you share based on the data pool that we have within Ingrooves, but also the whole of Universal Catalog. It's the biggest data set in the world in the music biz. So having access to that and creating a formula that then translates into reaching out to a fan base that really makes sense for that artist in that space is
So how does that practically work? How do I reach out to these fan bases? Like, how does it? Is it on, as in targeted ads on Spotify, or is it off platform, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have one tool that's called Smart Audience that lives within our platform, and it works via Facebook Business Manager. So you reach out to audiences on Facebook and Instagram for now. Mm-hmm. And usually what happens when you book an ad on Facebook and Instagram is you put in your targets, what do you want to achieve, who do you want to reach out to, and the cohorts that Facebook picks for you is based on who's most likely to click the ad and not who's likely to become a fan and listen to the music and really enjoy it. So our team of scientists thought, okay, we can do better than that, and looked at ways of using our data set, the historic data that we have from this artist and similar artists, and create a new cohort based on listening behavior and people who maybe have never heard of that artist but are most likely to really enjoy it based on their listening behavior, not social media behavior. And then you can create the Facebook ad just like you would do in a Facebook Business Manager. And then when the time comes to send out the ad, our tool will say, hey, Facebook, thanks, but let's use these people instead. And so far, our system is 2.3 times more successful in creating long-term listenership in that space.
That sounds incredible. Is that Ingrooves technology or Universal technology?
No, that's Ingrooves technology, and we have a patent, so no one else can have it.
That's so cool. And so, it's very exciting because you've come from Spotify as well, and that's huge. That's a large part of that product, too.
And that's the technology was one big decision maker in that space, because one Smart Audience wasn't really developed back then, but another thing that I found really interesting was how Ingrooves looks at analytics tools, because usually every distributor has this overview. You have a dashboard, you see what's been going on, etc. And oftentimes, as an editor, I realized, especially in the indie space, people don't really know how to read data, and they need help to make sense of it and identify marketing opportunities. So in our analytics suite, there's something called Songs on the Move, and it's like a news feed when something's bubbling between your track and the fan. So you get a little pop-up, and it says your track is connecting with an engaged audience on Apple Music, and then you can click on it, and you can see a more detailed view on where it's happening, location, if it's active or passive. So that's also very important, that it's not all coming from one playlist, but it's actually people seeking out the track themselves. They save it to their user collection, etc.
Sorry, can you just briefly define the difference between active listening and passive listening, and why active is better?
Yeah. Passive listening is everything that comes from an editorial playlist, a radio play, or anything that's like the auto play that happens after you listen to a playlist. So basically the fan didn't click actively on an artist profile or searched for the track. And an active listening behavior is when someone saves the track to their user collection and listens in their own playlist. They go to the artist profile, they search for the track. That's all lean-in active behavior.
And
so passive listening is music that is fed to you, and active listening is music that you feed yourself.
And so does that explain why some artists have crazy amounts of plays but can't sell tickets, and others don't have that many plays but end up packing out stages at Coachella and sell thousands of tickets in California? Is that why? Because those artists might have a lot less listeners, but they're all active listeners, as opposed to some big pop acts that might have crazy amounts of passive listeners, but they're not leaning in.
Yeah. You can also see, if you have the insights, you can see how many streams per listener this artist has. And an artist that is established, that has an existing active fan base, usually has more streams per listener than the other way around. And artists that have a lot of playlist features but don't have that active audience have usually just 1.3 streams per listener. And that means that a lot of people just listen to the track once, probably don't even notice that they listen to it, because they listen to this track within a playlist environment.
So how does Spotify make those editorial playlist decisions? How did they make them when you were there, I should say? You know, how much of it is personal taste? How much of it is data-led? How much of it is some kind of political decision based on something else? How does it work? How did it work?
Well, you try to be as your personal taste shouldn't play a big role. You're always a little bit biased, and also they hire genre experts because they are genre experts and they have that tastemaker appeal. But usually, if you take a step back, I was focused mainly on electronic music. And when I joined Spotify, I realized that there wasn't any space for the more underground-leaning electronic music that is very important in Germany. So I thought, okay, cool, let's change that. And then usually how you start your hypothesis around a playlist is, okay, this is, let's say, German techno is a huge movement in Germany, but we don't have a playlist for that. How do I change that? And then in that specific case, usually you spend a lot of time thinking about a name as well. So that's how Techno Bunker came to life, which is pretty intense when you listen to it. It's very dark. It's very Berghain kind of sound.
But it immediately makes me think of underground EDM, which is a genius name. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you test out stuff. So I was in Berlin. I was a techno DJ as well. That helped with that project for sure. So the first step was I knew the important players in that genre. So I started with a playlist that I thought would fit the bill. But then it's kind of a collaborative effort with the people listening to the playlist. So once you started a playlist, and a new playlist in particular, you'll see how people react to certain tracks, and you see certain metrics, and then you'll have to find the balance between not compromising the overarching theme of that playlist and also giving the people what they want in that space. So that's always the balancing act. But usually once you put something in a playlist, it's really out of your hand. And it's also sometimes, especially music industry people reaching out to editors saying, hey, it should be higher in that playlist. It's sorry, but it shouldn't. that is what the people are saying.
Can you unpack that? Sorry, what do you mean? What do you mean by it's out of your hands as soon as you put a song on the playlist?
Yeah, so I don't want to talk too much about this because that's not what I'm here. But
anymore. Get it?
Yeah.
I'm
But it's very
curious, though.
interesting.
Yeah, but it's you look at the data and the reaction of the users within that every playlist is its own little universe, and you've built this playlist for a certain target group, and the editor's job first and foremost is to make the users happy, so that they come back, they listen to the playlist longer, they save tracks from there. It's an inspiration. It's it's part of the culture, ideally. So usually once a track is in that system, based on all the different metrics that you look at, not just skip rates, but a lot of different things, you have to curate the playlist in the way that it makes sense for the user. And sometimes with a track that is maybe a little bit unusual for that certain environment, you say, "Oh, give it another week. Let's try," and then you'll see if the reaction is according to your plan. But if it isn't, then it's not the right fit for this particular environment, and then you might find another playlist for this track. But if you have limited inventory, you can't just push a track forever that's just not the right fit for a playlist.
So I know that you said you don't want to talk too much about Spotify, but I do feel we have a responsibility to a lot of our listeners who are pitching to Spotify and pitching to streaming services. And you, of course, being on the other side of it now, have this, what I see as a bit of a competitive advantage when it comes to pitching. Are there any tips and tricks that our listeners could take from your experience on getting playlisted?
Yeah, let me put it this way. Often, because of this competitive advantage, people ask me, "Okay, can you get me on playlists? What do I do?" Yeah. And then I usually say, "You're asking the wrong question," because the question should be, what can I do to be as independent from playlisting as possible? Mm-hmm. And there are tools and there are things you can do, because a lot of people just wait till release date, and then the track drops. They're looking at the editorial placements, and they might be happy or they might be disappointed. But owning this relationship between the artist and the fan is far more important and far more valuable than waiting for the right playlist. It can help a lot, and it has helped a lot. But if you look at the content strategy of not just Spotify, but every other DSP, as I said, the most important relationship in that editorial space is between the editor and the user. And the relationship between the editor and the artist or the label is secondary. So it's always more important to build a compelling content offering for the user. So what can you do as a label instead to build your own connections with a fan?
It's a story as old as time. Like, it doesn't matter how much the technology changes, it's the same shit. Don't make sure your whole career isn't built on Triple J adding your song to a playlist or whatever radio station in your country.
Getting a new Music Friday. Yeah.
Totally. It's like you've got to build real equity in your business, and it can't be based on, random gatekeepers here and there. Mm-hmm. I think that's spot on.
And hasn't there been instances where it's actually detrimental to an artist's career if they get on New Music Friday and then people skip it? Then the algorithm might see it as a song that people don't want to listen to, whereas, it's the difference between passive and active listening, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You have to, especially as an emerging artist, you have to be careful what you wish for, because you're competing against the Beyoncés and the Ed Sheerans in that space, and it might not, if it comes too early, it might not be the right time. So making sure that you build this relationship with fans early on and don't be too passive about it. So work on your own artist playlist, make it collaborative. If you have an artist playlist and you have a decent following on social media, make it a habit to post it once a week and say, I've made updates, these are my favorite songs. Sprinkle your own songs in that playlist, because fans won't mind because they're already following you. But make it a group effort and say, which songs did I miss? Which ones should I definitely listen to? And then act on it, put recommendations in the playlist, and then your fans instantly have something to talk about and are excited about it, and you build a community around that.
And I love that point about not competing as well, because Taylor Swift actually moved her album release date when she found out when Adele was going to release her record, and she's one of the biggest artists in the world. So even if she is considering a non-compete thing, our indie artists should be too. Yeah.
Listen to Taylor.
Nina, 2019 Universal bought Ingrooves. That was a year before you came on board, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you guys are based in the Universal building, owned by Universal.
Yeah.
How does your P&L, budget, KPIs, all of that, how does that integrate with Universal? So George Ash is head of Universal, you're head of Ingrooves. How does that relationship work? Where are the P&Ls shared? Where are they not? Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah. They're not shared. So we report to our headquarters in LA. So I report to Bob. And one of the biggest advantages that Ingrooves has is this global network. We work as a global team together, and Universal decided to keep it that way. So instead of plugging it into the local opcos of Universal, we have a global P&L that we all work on, and each market has their own P&L.
When you say we, you mean Ingrooves, not Universal?
Ingrooves, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and of course, Ingrooves Global is part of Universal Global, but we as a local team have our own P&Ls, and it's not connected to Universal here in Australia.
So your success will have no influences on George Ash's KPIs at all?
Besides market share.
Okay. And what resources do you share with Universal?
What do you mean?
So do you share, so you obviously share office space. Do you share HR resources?
Yeah.
Do you share marketing people? You don't share the technology is what I understood before.
Parts of Universal use our technology as well, and we distribute, for example, BTS and all the big K-pop titles that come through that.
That would be a fun one to work on.
Yes,
Definitely. You just know it's going to do well.
Yeah.
Good for the
biggest
cash flow, I
band in the world.
imagine. Yeah, really good for the cash flow. Yeah.
Would you say that they're your highest earning group on Titan? Yeah,
definitely.
Do they earn more than all of the Australian market combined for Ingrooves?
Probably.
It's big.
I mean, it's the biggest band in the world.
I know. They're so massive.
So then, I feel like I'm jumping around a lot of questions here. When you're allocating those resources, right, you've got one band in an Asian market which you look after.
Yep.
Who earn, if not more than the whole of Australia, close to it, whatever, it's comparable. Do you then split the resources evenly, like in terms of your headcount, your like efforts? Is it 50-50 BTS in Australia? Like how does that work?
Well, BTS is linked to the US, so it's not our team in South Korea. They play a big part in that, but that's allocated to the US. But
Got it.
Well, we have other pretty big K-pop titles. We look at it from a what do you need type of perspective. So in my region that I look after, we have some shared resources like label operations, etc. And then we look at the individual markets and say, okay, we need, for example, last year we decided to hire a commercial strategy person on top of the existing team just because we needed it. And
what does a commercial strategy person do?
That's the person that owns the relationships with the DSPs, the all the pitching go through that, but also on the other side, educating our labels and best practices, etc. So it's not just pitching and that, but also helping them grow their business in the DSP world and Facebook and TikTok and everywhere where music can be monetized.
So you mentioned, BTS signed out of America. You obviously signed a bunch of label deals here, artist deals here. How does it work in terms of global support? So I'm an Australian label and I signed for the world to Ingrooves. What is the strategy that Ingrooves or the resources Ingrooves can offer an Australian label globally? But more importantly, what are the incentives for American or European, UK offices of Ingrooves to actually support that Australian label or support that Australian artist? Because there are other labels out there where there's almost a disincentive. Mm-hmm. So you will sign to a label for the world in Australia, and a label in America will actually make less money exploiting your record than they would of a local signing because of how the royalties are all split internally. The Australian artist doesn't know that, but as far as the incentives work in the back end, they're more incentivized to promote their Australian art or their local signings in those local markets.
Yeah.
How do those incentives work in Ingrooves?
Okay. Just from a numbers perspective, I have two revenue buckets that I look at. The first one is my domicile labels and artists and labels that are from Australia and New Zealand, and how they generate revenue on a global scale. It doesn't matter where, it's just the overall global revenue that goes directly into my P&L, my local P&L, and that's what's also tied within our headcount, etc., and overhead in general. So that's where the margin comes from. But then there's the second bucket, and that's overall international and local content that generates revenue in Australia and New Zealand. And that's also important for my success here. And that's what I'm measured by as well. So, and that's the case for every other market. And also, we are a global team, and we don't think in those market buckets so much. We talk to each other on a daily basis, and if there is an opportunity for a certain release to be successful in this market, then we look at it as a team. So usually what happens, the ideal is that we already talk to the label during the onboarding process, etc. What are your goals? Where do you want to be successful? Where have you had successes before? Is there already a bubbling audience in a certain market outside of Australia? And then we look at it from that perspective and take it as a starting point. And then we'll say, okay, what have you done in the past to grow in that market? What is your plan for this particular release in that market? And then with that information, the label manager here who takes care of that label will go to the colleagues in, let's say, the US and say, okay, this is the project. This is what the label has done so far. This is what they're willing to invest in the market. What do you think? And then you'll get feedback saying, for this, college radio will probably help a lot, or they need to invest more in digital marketing, or they need to get a feature artist on board, and that's what, yeah.
So I always look at the incentives because I think regardless of what the philosophy is, the incentives always dictate behavior. So hearing you're saying you are KPI'd on generating revenue for your local signings globally, but as well as commercializing global signings locally as well. So you have two very distinct KPIs,
yes.
And that's the same everywhere in the world.
Yes.
So if Australian artist signs to Ingrooves and they have some ability to demonstrate revenue in another market, then that person in that other market will be just as incentivized to promote their record as they would their own local signings, because there's two distinct KPIs.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Do you understand that that's different to the other majors and stuff? Is that am I understanding that right? That's very different?
Yes, because traditionally a lot of major labels in particular, but also distributors, are very localized and focus on their local markets. And as you said, the incentive is to grow your local business, and everything's tied to the success of your local artists and labels. And that's not the case with us. I mean, it's super important, but it's not just that for us. And I think it's the right thing to do, if I may say so. It's a global marketplace, and that's the only way. If you really, especially here in Australia, where it's exporting music, is such a big topic for everyone, and we have excellent music, but sometimes there are limitations just because of that. And it has to be different in order to truly tap into that global marketplace.
Tell me about the team here. How big's the org chart? You know, what is it now? Where do you want it to get to? You know, who's doing what?
Yeah. At the moment, in Australia, there are 3 of us. We are hiring a 4th person at the moment. So right now we have one person who takes care of all of the label and label management and business development. She'll get support soon, hopefully within a month or so. Then we have the commercial strategy person who takes care of the relationships with the DSPs, and myself, who, you know, I do BD conversations, and I'm there for our labels to especially talk about DSPs and the overarching strategy, etc. So I'm available for our labels, but of course I focus on other things as well.
And BD conversations meaning business development?
Yes, exactly. So talking to potential new partners and explaining what we're all about and so on. Yeah. And then in Southeast Asia at the moment, we have a team in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and in Singapore. So those markets, Singapore is also commercial strategy, because there are a lot of where the DSPs are located for Southeast Asia, and South Korea have a team of 3 at the moment.
So where do you have plans to then expand that team over time, and how do you plan that growth? Is it based on revenue, or are you going to hire ahead of the curve, or what's the vision there?
Yeah, it's based on revenue for sure. For each market, we have a 5-year plan based on revenue, and then also with that, looking at headcount. It's a little bit like looking into the crystal ball, so things can change. And especially in this very tech-heavy music space, I'm always prepared to, change the whole game along the way, because things can change so quickly.
We're used to that. Lots of pivots.
Yeah.
Pivot City over here.
Yeah, Pivot City.
Yeah, totally. Been made redundant before. Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Have you really worked in the music industry if you haven't been made redundant or fired?
At least once.
Both of our
I've been
bases
fired twice.
work,
Yeah.
I've been made redundant once. Yeah.
Yeah, they made me redundant, and then they gave me another job. So it's like, oh yeah, just kidding.
It's the worst feeling. Yeah, I know.
So, okay, your growth is based on your revenue then. So can you tell us about how you plan to grow that revenue? Is it signing label deals? Is it signing artists? Is it doing deals with artists that have already a lot of success? Or is it signing completely green artists and trying to build something out of nothing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our perfect partner is an established label, because we don't really do artist services that much. So we used to do that before acquisition. There was a project within Ingrooves that had, I think it was called In Residence, where you had this label-like structure that helped artists grow in that space. But we as Ingrooves, we aren't a label, and sometimes it's very hard to mimic that for an artist that doesn't have the right infrastructure around them. So if we do artist deals, and we do them sometimes, but I'll do less and less of them just because of the experience that I now have, and just looking at how we can actually support them in that space. So if we do the deal with an artist direct, they have to make sure that they have someone who takes care of the release planning and does the A&Ring. As much as I want to do that, it's not my place. It's not my position in the music industry and in this supply chain, basically. So, yeah, the ideal partner that they have an existing infrastructure that is a label, and we add to that, and that's where we are really good at. And I find it, if I was to take on an artist deal, I really have to make sure that I can keep my promise, that is help them grow and be successful, and give them everything I have to be successful in that space. And if I can't do that based on the circumstances and missing parts in that team structure, then I failed them, and I don't want that.
So your ideal customer, client, partner, however you phrase it, is a label that is really well structured and is kind of doing their own thing and can operate self-sufficiently, and then you come in and amplify that and support that and provide the pipes, basically.
Which seems to tie into the overall vision of wanting to empower artists and empower labels as well. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
How do you then broker those deals? Like, what do your deals look like? Are you giving big advances? Are you doing super skinny royalty deals? Like, how do you then structure those kind of...
All of the above.
Yeah, okay.
Depending on what they need and what makes sense for us. So usually I try to find out what they're looking for, what their needs are, where in their system they need support. So we have a royalty accounting system. We have different tiers. There's, for a very lean operation, we have register splits. So if you have a lot of features, like especially in the hip hop or electronic scene, you can just set up payees in our system and pay your collaborators direct. Then there is Register Pro, which is more sophisticated and targeted towards a label that has more complex deals with their artists as well. You can feed in marketing spends that you've done, and you get statements for everyone involved. And then a third one is our royalty accounting team doing everything for you, like a top tier. And then, also figuring out, okay, where do you want to grow? Is that a market that we can support you in? Do you want to be on playlists only, or are you excited about the technology that we bring to the table, and do we share a certain vision? And then, we'll figure it out.
So how aggressive are you planning to be in market? Do you want to actively go out and, in an ideal world, would you like to sign a new label deal a quarter, a month, a week? Like, how aggressive or how ambitious are your revenue growth acquisition goals or deal making goals?
Well, it sounds a little bit odd, but if I only sign that one deal that is perfect this year, I'll be fine. I mean, we signed more this year already, and we are successful in that space. But it's more about finding the perfect part. And it's also, for us, retention is very important as well. It's not just about getting that one deal in and then after 2 or 3 years parting ways again. So retention is really important, having that long-term successful partnership together, growing together. That's even more important than getting a lot of deals in the door, because I have to be mindful of the limited resources that we have, and I need my business to be scalable, and I need to find the right partners who fit in that system so that my existing partnerships don't suffer because I made a bad decision in that space.
Nina, I have loved hearing you talk about Ingrooves. I've learnt a lot. I'm sure a lot of people in the music industry in Australia aren't even that familiar with Ingrooves, so I'm hoping that this will change that. It's very exciting to hear about what you're doing, where you're going to take it. We can't wait to see it. I want to leave this with one question, and that is 5, 10 years, however long you're at Ingrooves, what do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy. That's a big question.
That's why we saved it till the end.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, the part that I love most about my job is I can empower people internally, and I really want to make a difference in the lives of my team, and I want to leave them with the feeling that they've learned a lot from me and that they don't need me anymore. So one of my biggest goals for my team, and they're all pretty new to this market. We're a pretty young region compared to others. I want them to be very confident in their business decisions. I want them to be confident in their path and successful, and yeah, that's really my main goal, to support my team and then step aside and just let them run.
Nina, it has been an incredible privilege to have you here. I'm really grateful you came, Poppy. You're really grateful she came?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you,
and
Nina.
just amazing to see a woman in such a high profile and powerful role. And, there is this saying, you can't be what you can't see. And so I hope that there's a lot of listeners out there who are perhaps young women wanting to get into the music industry that see you sitting here and see all the success that you've had and just go, yeah, cool, I'll do that.
I hope so.
Thank you,
so
Nina.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.